In June 2023, a team of Finnish scientists published something that should have terrified every historian in Europe. Hidden in 50 million wood cells from ancient trees, they'd found evidence that we've been reading climate history wrong for decades. Not slightly wrong, fundamentally wrong. Their paper in Nature didn't just challenge a few dates or temperatures. It suggested our entire understanding of medieval climate might be built on a mistake. Here's why this matters. If they're right, then one of history's most persistent myths might not be myth at all. Those naked, tattooed Scottish warriors the Romans wrote about, the ones historians dismiss as propaganda. What if there's more to that story than anyone imagined? Because at exactly the same moment, the Finnish team was revolutionizing climate science. Archaeologists in Scotland were uncovering something equally revolutionary. They found cities where we thought there were villages. Forests where we thought there was wasteland, international trade networks where we thought there was isolation. The Picts, those mysterious people who ruled Scotland from 300 to 900 AD, are turning out to be nothing like the naked savages of Roman accounts. Or are they? This is the story of how two scientific revolutions are colliding to reveal a Scotland we never knew existed. And after months of investigation, I'm going to show you why everything you think you know about ancient Scotland might be wrong. Ever wondered where these warriors actually came from? After 2 years of research, I've finally uncovered their true origins, daily life, and fascinating society. My book reveals their customs, achievements, and the truth about what really happened to the Picts. My subscribers get an exclusive 65% off through the link below. The paper that started this revolution has a boring title. Fennoscandian tree ring anatomy shows a warmer modern than medieval climate. But what Jesper Björklund's team actually did was extraordinary. Instead of measuring tree rings the traditional way, just their width, they analysed the individual cells, 50 million of them, from 188 ancient Scots pines. What they found contradicts decades of climate reconstruction. Previous studies overestimated medieval temperatures, missed regional variations, got fundamental patterns wrong. Co-author Georg von Arx put it bluntly: if the previous reconstructions were used as a benchmark, this would significantly downplay the human influence on current climate warming. To translate, we've been misreading the climate history that underpins our understanding of ancient civilizations, including the Picts. Meanwhile, 500 miles away in Aberdeen, Professor Gordon Noble was making his own revolutionary discovery. His Northern Pict project had found something nobody expected at a hill fort called Tapo Noth. Not a small settlement, not a modest fortress, a city. 4,000 people living at 500 meters elevation, higher than most Scottish settlements today. Let that sink in. 4,000 people living higher than we live today, in what we've been told was a frozen, deforested wasteland. Every Scottish schoolchild learns the same story. By the time the Romans arrived, Scotland's great forests were already gone, cleared by prehistoric farmers, destroyed by climate change, reduced to scattered fragments in a landscape of bog and moor. But the pollen doesn't lie. At Rhynie, another major Pictish centre, Noble's team found something that shouldn't exist according to conventional history. Pollen analysis showed the hills around this sophisticated settlement were, in their words, probably wooded and dominated by birch trees, not scattered trees. Even more shocking is what dendrochronologist Coralie Mills discovered through her Scottish Native Woods project. In the 15th century, 1,000 years after the Picts, Scottish carpenters were still felling oaks that were over 300 years old. Trees that had started growing during the late medieval period in areas that today are barren moorland. If Scotland was the deforested wasteland historians claim, where did these ancient forests come from? How did trees survive for centuries in a supposedly treeless landscape? The uncomfortable truth is that Scotland's great deforestation didn't happen in prehistory. It happened recently. Forest coverage dropped from substantial medieval levels to just 4% by 1750. The villain wasn't climate change or ancient farmers. It was sheep, the highland clearances. The British Navy's insatiable appetite for ship timber. Industrial charcoal production. We've been projecting modern Scotland's barren landscape onto the past. But what if Pictish Scotland looked completely different? Now here's where things get really interesting. If Scotland had more forests than we thought, if the climate readings are wrong, then what about those naked warriors? The Romans were absolutely consistent about this. Herodian, writing about the Emperor Septimius Severus's Scottish campaigns around 208 AD, claimed the Britons wear no clothes that would conceal the decorations on their bodies. The name Pict itself supposedly means painted people. Case closed, right? The Romans said they were naked, so they were naked. Except there's a problem. Actually, several problems. First, there's the Orkney Hood, discovered in a peat bog, carbon dated to 250 to 615 AD, exactly the Pictish period. It's a child's hooded garment made with sophisticated herringbone twill and tablet-woven fringe. This isn't primitive. It's complex cold-weather clothing, requiring advanced textile technology. You don't develop that technology if nobody needs clothes. Second, there are the Pictish stones. Over 350 of them, covered in human figures, every single one showing clothed people. The Hilton of Cadbull stone displays elaborate penannular brooches, fastening cloaks. The Aberlemno stones show warriors in knee-length tunics. The Duplin cross depicts a king in multiple layers of robes. Third, there's the archaeology. The St. Ninian's Isle treasure, discovered in 1958, contained 12 elaborate penannular brooches. 12 different ways to fasten a cloak. Why would you need 12 different cloak pins if you never wore a cloak? Every Pictish settlement yields spindle whorls, loom weights, weaving combs. Industrial-scale textile production. Fragments survive showing diamond twills, check patterns that might be the ancestors of tartan, both wool and linen fabrics. So why did the Romans insist they were naked? Investigating contradictions like this is exactly why I wrote The Painted People, to separate what the Romans claimed from what archaeology actually reveals. The digital book digs deep into these exact mysteries across 10 chapters, from their mysterious symbols in stone to their maritime trade networks, from their fortress kingdoms to what daily life was actually like in Pictland. Plus, there's an exclusive digital recipe collection available as an add-on during checkout. Based on isotope analysis of Pictish remains, you can literally recreate their actual diet while discovering how wrong we've been about their world. Both are digital downloads with instant access after purchase. The book is 65% off for channel viewers, and every purchase funds more investigations into historical mysteries like this one. Link in the description if you're ready to question everything you thought you knew. Here's where modern science gets fierce. Not just disagreement fierce. Academic reputation on the line fierce. One camp, led by Ulf Buntgen, published a landmark 2016 paper in Nature Geoscience documenting the late antique Little Ice Age. From 536 to 660 AD, prime Pictish time, volcanic eruptions triggered cooling across the northern hemisphere. Summer temperatures dropped by up to 2.7 degrees Celsius. Crops failed, populations collapsed. This should have devastated Scotland, should have made it even colder than today, should have made naked warriors impossible. But here's the problem. The archaeological evidence shows the exact opposite. This is when Pictish culture exploded. Symbol stones appeared. Massive hill forts reached peak occupation. International trade intensified. They were importing Mediterranean wine and French glass, while supposedly freezing to death. The other camp points to regional variation. Scotland isn't continental Europe. It's surrounded by ocean, warmed by the Gulf Stream, buffered from extremes. Some researchers find evidence that warm conditions persisted longer in northwest Europe. Marine archives from Orkney suggest warming trends that don't match the volcanic winter timeline. The Scottish Archaeological Research Framework makes an extraordinary admission. There is no record of past temperature change for Scotland. from direct measurements. Everything is proxy data. Pollen, tree rings, ice cores, isotopes, and different scientists read these proxies completely differently. Even more damning, the framework explicitly states there's a mismatch between the landscapes imagined from archaeological data and those imagined by paleoenvironmentologists. Translation: the archaeologists and climate scientists are looking at the same place, the same time period, and seeing two completely different worlds. So let's solve this once and for all. Did the Picts fight naked or not? The Roman who started this myth was Herodian, a Syrian bureaucrat who never set foot in Britain. Modern historian Edward C. Ecoles described Herodian's writing as rhetorical, pompous, repetitive, derivative. He recycled stereotypes, not observations. But here's what's fascinating. Tacitus, who had genuine sources from Scottish campaigns, never mentions nakedness. He describes Caledonian tactics, appearance, weapons, but never mentions them being unclothed. Dio Cassius, with better sources than Herodian, focuses on military effectiveness, not bare skin. Even more telling is what Gildas, a British monk writing around 545 AD, actually said. He complained about Picts having a preference for covering their villainous faces with hair rather than their nakedness of body with decent clothing. He's criticizing their beards, not confirming nudity. It's a rhetorical insult about grooming, not a factual observation about clothing. The etymology argument falls apart too. Pict, as painted people, doesn't appear until 297 AD, and modern linguists suggest it might derive from what the Picts called themselves, not from Latin pictus. The only Celtic warriors documented as fighting naked were the Gaesatai at the Battle of Telamon in 225 BC in Italy, where summer temperatures hit 30 degrees Celsius. Not in Scotland, where, even in the warmest reconstruction, summer peaks reached maybe 17 degrees Celsius. You know what happens when you fight naked in 17 degrees Celsius with horizontal rain? For the first hour, maybe two, you might manage if you keep moving, but within 2 to 4 hours you'd be shivering so violently you couldn't hold a weapon. Within 6 to 8 hours, you'd likely be unconscious from hypothermia. The wet increases heat loss fivefold. The wind doubles it. Your body can't generate enough heat to compensate. It's not instant death, but it's guaranteed incapacitation. Not exactly a winning battle strategy. But here's what nobody talks about. What if both sides are right? What if the climate varied so dramatically across regions and time periods that both narratives are true? What if some Picts in some places, at some times, could go minimally clothed while others bundled in furs? What if volcanic winters devastated some regions, while others, protected by geography and Gulf Stream warmth, barely noticed? The Finnish study suggests we've been missing these variations all along, reading averages instead of extremes, smoothing out the very differences that might explain the contradictions. Consider this: every impossible discovery makes sense if we accept that Scotland wasn't uniformly cold or warm, forested or barren, but a patchwork of microclimates and microenvironments. The 4,000-person hill fort at elevation, maybe it sat in a warm pocket. The sophisticated textile production, maybe for trade to colder regions. The Roman accounts of nakedness, maybe they encountered a specific group in a specific place during an unusual warm spell. Or maybe, and this is the truly radical possibility, the Romans didn't lie, but they didn't understand what they saw. Ritual nakedness for battle, temporary body painting for ceremonies, weather-specific clothing practices they interpreted as permanent states. After months of investigation, here's what I can tell you with certainty. The Picts wore clothes, sophisticated, well-made clothes. The archaeological evidence is unanimous. Every Pictish stone shows clothed figures. Every settlement yields textile production evidence. The Orkney hood proves they had complex cold-weather garments. The forests existed longer than believed. Not the mythical Great Wood of Caledon, but substantial woodlands that survived well into the medieval period. The catastrophic deforestation came later, much later than traditionally taught. The climate remains genuinely mysterious. Different evidence points in different directions. Regional variations were enormous. What was true for one valley might be false for the next. The Finnish discovery suggests we're only beginning to understand how wrong our reconstructions might be. The naked warrior myth comes from Roman propaganda, not Pictish practice. Every piece of actual Pictish evidence, their art, their artifacts, their settlements, shows a clothed, sophisticated society adapted to their environment. New technologies are about to revolutionize this field again. DNA from soil samples can identify exact plant species from specific time periods. Protein analysis of textiles reveals not just what they wore, but what animals provided the wool. Isotope analysis of bones shows temperature and precipitation at unprecedented resolution. Each technique reveals the past as more complex than we imagined, more variable, more regional, more interesting. The Picts themselves left no written accounts of their climate or clothing, but they left us something better. Hundreds of stones showing how they saw themselves. Clothed, armed, sophisticated, adapted to whatever environment they faced. Whether warm or cold, forested or open, they weren't naked warriors in a tropical paradise. They weren't desperate survivors in a frozen wasteland. They were something more interesting. A successful civilization that thrived for 600 years in conditions we're only beginning to understand. The Finnish team's discovery that we've been misreading tree rings for decades is just the beginning. If that fundamental methodology was wrong, what else have we misunderstood? What other facts about the past are actually misinterpretations of misread data? The real revolution isn't discovering whether Pictish Scotland was warm or cold, forested or barren. It's discovering that we don't know, can't know with current methods, may never know with absolute certainty. But that uncertainty is precisely what makes this exciting. Every new study overturns old certainties. Every excavation reveals unexpected complexity. Every technological advance shows the past was stranger than we imagined. The Romans said the Picts were naked, painted savages. The Victorians imagined them as noble warriors in a harsh landscape. Modern archaeology reveals them as sophisticated people navigating complex environmental and political challenges. But the biggest revelation? We're still wrong, still missing crucial pieces, still misreading evidence. The Finnish study proves our methodologies are flawed. The archaeological discoveries prove our assumptions are wrong. The climate controversy proves we're asking the wrong questions. The truth about the Picts isn't that they were naked or clothed in warm forests or cold wastelands. It's that they were successful. For 600 years, they thrived in conditions we can't even accurately reconstruct. They left us magnificent carved stones, sophisticated metalwork, evidence of international trade, and a mystery that deepens with every discovery. Maybe that's the real lesson, not what the climate was, but how humans adapt to whatever it is. Not whether they wore clothes, but how they created a civilization that lasted longer than the United States has existed. The naked truth about the Picts? They won. They survived the Romans, the climate, the Vikings, and everything else thrown at them. If this investigation fascinated you, please like and subscribe. I'll keep following this story as new evidence emerges. And trust me, with the methodological revolutions happening in climate science and archaeology, new evidence is coming. Drop a comment with your take. Do you think we've been completely wrong about ancient Scotland's climate? And if you want to dive deeper into separating Pictish fact from Roman fiction, The Painted People is still 65% off through the link below. It's a digital book with instant access covering everything from their fortress kingdoms to their mysterious language, from their masterful metalwork to how they transformed into medieval Scotland. Plus, grab the exclusive Pictish recipe collection add-on during checkout to taste what they actually ate. Thanks for joining me in discovering that sometimes the biggest revelations come from admitting what we don't know.